Welcome to another edition of Jazz Smack, where tonight the Utah Jazz traveled to Minnesota to play the T-Wolves. Isaiah Collier is finally back on the court. He started. Everything's great. Let's talk about it.
Jazz Smack, NBA and Utah Jazz basketball.
So I think we really wanted to see Isaiah back on the court. I think many of us were looking forward to that. And it's great to finally have him back. Now, what was really surprising about this game is that Will Hardy inserted him back into the starting lineup rather than kind of easing him back into it, playing him in off of bench minutes, 12 to 15 minutes off the bench. But nope, he went back into the starting lineup. And not only did he do that, he played the most minutes of any player on the roster in this particular game. Now, there were a lot of reasons for that. The Jazz were behind by a lot of points, but still, to watch Isaiah in his return after missing all of preseason and finally getting back into the lineup, to see him start again, as he did last year, and then play the most minutes on the team, now that was shocking. And to Isaiah's credit, he did end up shooting 50% from the field. He got 3 assists. I mean, at least he didn't have major shooting struggles. We want to see that. And he was able to, the most important thing about this whole game is Isaiah is simply back on the court. I think that's what, and now we'll see what happens with the lineups. It's really going to be, Walt, we've seen Walt play, and Walt, because of Isaiah's, insertion back into the lineup, Walt was reduced to about 12 minutes tonight. So that's the challenge for Hardy. Where are all these point guard minutes going to come from? And it seems to me right now, he's probably going to lean into Isaiah for the next spell. Walt's having some struggles on defense. And he's having some struggles running the team. And it's a learning process. Isaiah has an entire year under his belt running the team. So I think Will is going to lean into that right now and try and help stabilize the situation with, they've had some games where they've gotten down early. And I think that Will would like to remedy that situation where they get off to better starts. And I think that he's hoping that Isaiah can provide some of that. Now, Isaiah's his speed with the ball in his hands is amazing. That's his biggest strength. He is so fast with the ball in his hands. And we saw that in the very early parts of the game tonight. He is just absolutely elite in that area. So we'll see what happens. But I think that, quite frankly, I think that Isaiah is going to play some significant minutes in the short term just because he has a year of experience under his belt. And is he going to go with that Keontae and Isaiah 2-guard lineup? It's really undersized defensively, but, he may choose to do that regardless.
Yeah, I was as shocked as you. I was shocked for a few reasons. One, Keontae's been playing better than I think a lot of people expected, better than we expected. So he's been playing a better point guard. And not only did Isaiah get in the starting lineup, he was playing point guard. Keontae moved to off guard, or kind of maybe they were playing quasi point guard, but it was really kind of Isaiah leading. You saw the speed that was just night and day versus what we've had. And in giving Keontae credit, I think that he's improved over the offseason and getting into the set and getting, so I think I haven't looked at the advanced statistics on him because I said wouldn't do that until like 15 or 20 games in. But my eye test is he is getting into the offense faster, but Isaiah is in a whole nother category. He's just so elite, like you said. But the other thing that's surprising me about this, he was available in the last few games. He got DNPs. And I think he was available. At least he was listed as being available, and he got DNPs. And then you think when we're struggling defensively, we would actually play the bigger lineup, right? And he didn't do that. Like, he took, Taylor and Flip out of the lineup. But maybe he's just testing right now and to see kind of, well, that wasn't working, so we'll try something else. But it was great to see him. I was really jazzed to see him play it again.
Yeah, I think it's still going to be trial and error for a while. Will Hardy does not want to get be blown out. I mean, in games, because I know that he doesn't view that as a great learning environment. And according to the Minnesota, Jim Peterson and the guy who does the play-by-play, I was watching that feed tonight. This was the biggest halftime deficit in Utah Jazz history, I believe they said, which was, we all know that one halftime deficit in the Stockton Malone era where they were behind by 30-something in the Delta Center at halftime. And then the second half, they came back to win that game, which I think was one of the largest comebacks in NBA history. But I think that this was, I believe that's what they said, that this was the largest halftime deficit in Utah Jazz history. But Will Hardy doesn't want that because it makes the learning environment more difficult. So I think that, and I'm not saying that this is what I agree with or disagree with, but I'm saying this is what Will Hardy, it seems to me, this is what he thinks. And he thinks that it's better to be competitive in these games and have the guys learn slowly in a partial role in those competitive type games rather than giving the young guys a larger role when they are down by huge margins. And this game obviously tonight got out of hand quickly. And it's the last game of a long road trip. So it's kind of young team, last game of a long road trip. Stuff happens. But I think that's what Will Hardy's going to do, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and we, you made this comment to me. I don't think we said it on a podcast. We said it off a podcast. Is that your sense was Will was going to play the veterans more and more because that's kind of what he's done in the past. And if you think about our starting lineup, it's Lowry, late 20s, Nurk, 30s, and Svi, late 20s. Right, and then two young guys, a third-year player and a second-year player. So your sense is, and I think you're going to be right, is that Will is going to play, even though he doesn't have a lot of veterans, he's going to give him a lot of minutes because he does think that's either he wants to win or he thinks it's important in the learning process or both. But I think he's going to do that more and more. And actually, I'll pull the statistics for the next game. And we got another shot at Minnesota next, which is great, so we can get back at them. Or they could double up and get back at us one way or another. But I'm very curious to look at the top 7 or 8 draft picks and see how many minutes they're getting to game. Because my bet is Ace is getting the fewest of all of those. Like Knipple went for 30 tonight. We talked about VJ Edgecombe. Cooper Flagg is getting a lot of minutes. My guess is Ace is actually getting the least of all of those. And I know that bothers some fans, but I do think it's consistent with what Hardy does in general, that's it's kind of the Sloan motto too, is like you earn it. So it doesn't, it won't surprise me if that's the path that we go down. But it'll be interesting to see. Like I'm looking forward to going at Minnesota again, right? Like after getting a shellacking like we did tonight, let's see how they come out, right? That's something to look forward to see how our guys come out, and are they going to come out with a chip on their shoulder? Are they going to come out to really pound them down? Let's see what they do in this next game.
Yeah, I think the aggressiveness from the tip is going to be much better. I think Hardy's a demand that they're into him defensively and all that. After losing by 40, that's what you do. I mean, if you have some fight, and I think he's going to demand it. And if they don't do that, then I think he's going to just wholesale substitutions to new guys, not Lowry, but everybody else. So there was one particular play I want to give a highlight to tonight that was by Flip. And, Flip has been much maligned, and there's nothing wrong with that. He has deserved some of that, and he knows it. I mean, he's for his defense, his lack of defense. So I want to highlight one particular play where he took a charge, and it was an on-ball charge where he's playing defenses against Julius Randle, and he's able to get, it wasn't textbook. I'm not saying this is textbook, but he was able to do enough to get back in front of Julius Randle and take it right in the chest. And I thought this was actually a terrific play, and I thought this was the highlight of the night, this particular play. So let's take a look at that.
Donation from your Utah Forward stores to the Utah Food Bank.
97-60. Offensive foul. And the Jazz try.
So that play was not perfect. I mean, he kind of took the initial bump in his side, which that's not textbook, but he was able to recover, and he put in the effort to recover, and he took it right in the chest in the end. And the Jazz need more of those type of plays if they want to be really good at some point, which is the whole goal. That's the entire objective. Be really good at some point. They need more of those type of plays. What Kyle just did there, that's what not only Kyle needs to do, but the entire team needs to do. So I'm looking forward to this next game with Minnesota and see what type of fight the young guys have, especially the young guys. I mean, we kind of know what the veterans are going to do, but what type of fight do the young guys actually show?
Yeah, I like that play, but I was thinking during the game. It's interesting that you brought up Flip because you and I had not talked about this. Is I was watching Flip, move his feet. He was slow on, in the I think it's in the second quarter, like getting back on defense. Somebody scored. He grabbed the ball. You could tell he wasn't happy. He's trying hard. We all see that he's really trying hard. I wonder if I was thinking, maybe Flip's role or his defensive role is to really beef up in the offseason and become like there's a lot of guys that are just enforcer types, right, on defense. Steven Adams. And he's never going to be Steven Adams, I say. But Steven Adams is not fleet of foot. But you can say, look, I take my limitations that I have, but I'm going to add another element to it. Because you talked about how much you like Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, these guys like that you want to have on your team. And maybe Flip, if he doesn't have the fleet of foot, maybe he can develop some of that other part of it, because that's a huge benefit defensively and I think tone for your team. So it'll be curious to see how he kind of develops over time and kind of figures out how he best plays defense, whether that's through strength and brute or it's whether moving his feet better, whatever it is. But that was a great clip you just showed.
Yeah. And we with a lot of these guys on the Jazz right now, we don't really know where their career path takes them. They're so young. They're trying to figure out their niche. And some of these guys are going to be bigger minutes than some other guys. And some guys are just going to have to find their little niche that they can fill in the NBA if they're going to stick in the NBA. That doesn't apply to everybody. That certainly applies to some of the guys. So you kind of have to, I remember when Jonas Valanciunas came into the NBA, and he was kind of a spaz, a very thin guy. He was running up and down the court. He was fast. His athleticism as like a rookie was more impressive than his athleticism now. But his size right now, Jonas Valanciunas is a huge guy, one of the biggest bruisers we have in the NBA. And that is completely different than what he was when he came into the NBA. So that's where he kind of found his opportunity to contribute to a team, is to be a bruiser. So that's what he turned himself into. I don't know how he became that big so fast, but he transformed his body in a couple of off seasons to completely look. He looks completely different. You wouldn't even recognize the guy in like a lineup photo. He looks so different. So it's always possible. We'll see what Flip decides to do. We'll see what the coaching staff wants him to do. But, I'm still happy with Flip. I'm happy with his effort. And quite frankly, he's one of the guys I think can stick with the Jazz. I don't know how big of a role. We're all searching for those guys that can play 35 minutes on a title contending team. And it's a question mark how many of those guys we have right now. But Flip is certainly, I don't know if he's going to be a 35-minute guy on a title contending team, but he certainly, I believe he will be able to play a role on a really good team. It's just how much of a role, that's to be determined.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the skills he showed in the summer league, that we were really, if he could translate those into the regular season, even if it's not good defensively, but it was rebounding and his unbelievable, skills on offense, he'd be a good player in the NBA. The issue is we don't know if he can do that, because so far in the beginning of the season, his stats have not been fantastic, right? And I know we're not looking at the stats yet, but the reality is, to be an elite offensive player, you got to translate it into the season. And we're all hoping for Flip. I want him to be that guy, but we don't know yet. But I do like his effort. I like Flip personally. I'm glad he's on the team, and one of the guys we can root for. I had a couple of stats I was just going to throw out there, and if you know them, then I'm not going to ask you. But have you looked at the team stats for the teams this year, like how we rank relative to other teams? Have you looked at them recently?
Well, I've looked at the field goal percentage and 3-point field goal percentage. I've looked at those.
Okay,
I haven't looked extensively, no.
Well, that's actually the ones I was going to talk about. So you already know. So I'll just tell. I was going to quiz you to kind of figure out where you were going to guess where they are. So right now, the Jazz out of 30 teams are 28th in the league in field goal percentage. In 3-point field goal percentage, this one surprised me. They're last in the league, 30th out of 30th. So it surprised me because Will is so focused on the 3-point shot. That's his whole focus, right? Is spread the floor, 5-man out, 3-point shot. It really surprised me that we were shooting that poorly, because you'd figure even if we don't got great 3-point shooters, he's creating a lot of opportunities because he's kind of spreading players out and getting that. And then in plus minus, we're a little better in plus minus. We're 26th out of 30 teams. So 8 games in, 9 games in, offensively, not stellar, right? Not stellar where we are, but I thought it's interesting nevertheless. I mean, the 3-point one is the one that stood out to me. Of course, overall field goal percentage at 28th in the league is not stellar either.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was looking at that, and I saw after tonight's game they went down to 30th, and they're still, I believe, they're 13th in attempts. So they're still relatively high in 3-point attempts per game when they're shooting the worst percentage. And what's really interesting about this whole, I was looking at the other teams in this 3-point percentage.
Yeah.
So the number one 3-point percentage right now is Houston at 42% as a team. Yet they are second lowest in attempts right now. Sacramento is lowest in attempts, and they're near the top third in percentage. So it's really interesting to look at that to see maybe the quality of their 3-pointers is simply better. They're a little bit more choosy in which threes they take. So, I mean, and that's an interesting argument. Which route do you go? Are you trying to find better shots, or are you just trying to hoist as many threes as you want? I mean, I know the argument because we've heard it from others who talk about the Utah Jazz. Their argument is that you should take as many as possible, as many as you can get up. And I don't know if that's. I personally don't think that's the right route. I think you should be more choosy and go for shot selection. But I mean, this is another thing. The NBA, it kind of has these swings in various directions. Somebody becomes really successful doing something, and then there's a bunch of copycats. And then somebody comes along and does something different, and then there's a copycat, and they're really successful, and then there's a bunch of copycats of that. So we're kind of in this mode right now of shooting a ton of threes, and kind of everybody does it. Even Houston and Sacramento are still taking 30 threes a game, just 29 point something. So that's an interesting conversation. And those statistics I find fascinating personally.
Yeah, I do too. So you looked at exactly the statistics. I didn't look at the attempts. So you're dead on. It was 13. So you just recently looked at it. But let me just read, because I think that not a ton of positives in the game tonight. Let's just be honest, everyone. But 3-point field goals, and this probably includes tonight's game, and that's why it's gone up. Houston, 43.3%. Incredible. Minnesota, number 2, 41.9%. Philadelphia, number 3, surprises me, 40%. But, VJ Edcombe, Maxey is playing much better this year. Milwaukee Bucks, 39.7. Who would ever put Milwaukee Bucks there? Chicago is playing extremely well, 39.1. And then Miami Heat, another team that I wouldn't put as a 3-point shooting team, 39.1, in the Golden State, which you would expect. So really interesting to see. Now, I think that's going to flush out over the year. But Houston being at the top really is, it surprised me. I mean, it surprised me who's in that list.
Yeah, if Houston maintains a percentage around 40, for the year or in the upper 30s, boy, they're sitting in a great spot. That with the way that team plays defense, even if they shoot few threes, that team's in a really good spot. The way they defend.
So who do you? So other than the Jazz, who do you think is the bottom? 29th, Dallas.
Yeah.
28th, Indiana Pacers. 27th, Boston Celtics. You know, Jaylen Brown's playing well this year, but they just don't have shooters. I mean, other than Pritchard. And this is one that every time comes back to haunt the Los Angeles Lakers, 26. All of the money they spend, like all the people they swap in and out, they never can get shooters, and it kills them. You know, in the modern NBA, they cannot shoot the three-point shot. You know, like I loved Vando when he was on our team, but they got a lot of Vandos on that team, right? They can't shoot. And like even, I don't know what Austin Reeves is shooting. He's probably shooting better than I would give him credit for. But you need some guys that are just like in jacket. And in Dallas, you know, honestly, they took a gamble on Clay, and you know, Clay can't shoot anymore. You know, he's passed.
Yeah, well, he's already. I saw something's report today that they're already shopping him around, but there's not a lot of interest in Clay. His age and his legs are just gone. He went through serious injuries. He lost his legs, and that killed his ability to shoot the basketball. Like those of us who've played a lot know that that's a big part of especially shooting deep is your legs, and Clay's legs are toast. And so he's struggling that. The other team that's down there at the bottom is the Indiana Pacers. And I'd said that I thought Indiana would be okay this year, and I still believe that. The problem with Indiana is we all know what happened with, you know, their point guard situation. So they lost their guy for the year, but they also lost their two backup guys. McConnell hasn't played yet, and they lost Nembhard too. So they're without, and then they picked up Mac McClung to try and insert him into playing some point guard minutes, and he's not a point guard. So he's already off the team too. So I think Indiana's going to be okay, but they got to get McConnell, and they have to get Nembhard back into the lineup because those guys have to play. So I think Indiana's going to turn things around, but boy, it's when you lose your three guys that play point guard, I mean, that's rough.
Yeah, I'll say this, and if I'm in Indiana, if I'm the Indiana management in a year like this, and we're not going to get into whether we like the draft or not, because I think everyone understands like our views of how the draft works. But I think what Boston's doing, and I think what Indiana's doing, and I think it's smart, is when you take an unfortunate event like Tatum, you know, Halliburton, what happens to you, what you really want to do in that season is you want to pick up assets. So if I'm Indiana, I actually don't want to win this year. I want to get, assuming they still have their draft pick, you know, I want to get in like a decent pick and get up. And honestly, I think some of these teams, Golden State did this like 6 years ago or so,
yeah,
right? When Curry got hurt,
yeah, with Wiseman,
you know, and they got the number 2 draft pick. Now they just, okay, it's a gamble. They got the wrong guy. That's clear, but they got the number 2. So that wouldn't surprise me if like Indiana's doing that. But Dallas too, I feel for Clay. I mean, he had his day. He's on a great team. He won a lot of championships. Curry was clearly the guy on that team, probably Draymond next. But, Clay was a great player. Don't take that away from him. So I hope he finds a path that if they are shopping him, he finds somewhere where you can regain a little bit of what he had and then go out gracefully. I mean, he's a quirky guy. I heard somebody say, I hear a lot of it because of where I live, but I heard somebody say this about Clay is they think he could be like a great announcer podcaster because he's a quirky guy. He has a lot of like weird things that he does. And so there's a career for him after the game, even though he's made his $300 million playing the game. So, he's 36. He's had a good career. Hopefully he can find some way to have a nice path out and then find something else for his career. Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised he still has that place on the water, in Sausalito or whatever it is that he lives. But, that wouldn't surprise me at all if they kept that and he ends up back there after he's like done with his playing days. So anyway, All right. Well, I think we will call it quits for tonight. For those watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also follow us on X at Jazz Smack, and we will talk to everybody later.